Hello, thank you. Welcome to the session on implementing the New Urban Agenda. My name is Christopher Swope. I'm the managing editor of Citiscope. It's a news service that covers urban innovation in cities around the world. We also extensively covered the United Nations Habitat 3 conference on the future of cities last year, and we've been following the aftermath of that quite closely. Habitat 3 was held in Quito, Ecuador last October, about 1 year ago. And the Habitat conferences are quite interesting because they're the one time every 20 years that countries get together to talk about their cities. And today we're going to be talking about the outcome of Habitat 3, which is something called the New Urban Agenda. The New Urban Agenda is a non-binding agreement that nearly 170 countries agreed to, and it sets a vision for how all the players who influence the future of cities, from national governments to local governments to regional governments, the international development funders, the UN program, civil society, it sets a vision for how all these players can be rowing the boat in the same direction when it comes to the future of cities. I'll let our panelists tell you more about the New Urban Agenda, but to me, what's most interesting is perhaps the historical context, because at previous Habitat conferences 20 and 40 years ago, the subtext was that cities are a problem to be avoided. They're dirty, messy places filled with poverty and crime. And so this thinking tended to marginalize cities in the global dialogue and in the ways that many countries thought about urbanization. By contrast, the New Urban Agenda says the opposite. It says that cities can be places of prosperity and good quality of life for their citizens, but only if we do some good urban planning and build cities the right way. So the global community has moved to a different mindset from seeing cities as the problem to seeing them as a solution. So what comes next? That's the question we're going to be asking today, and we've got a great panel of experts to help us answer it. First, on my right, we have from UN Habitat, we have Mr. Paulius Kulikauskas. Paulius represents UN Habitat in Europe from its office in Brussels. And second, for an on-the-ground perspective, we have from the city of Blantyre, Malawi, which is the industrial and commercial capital of the country, the mayor, Mr. Wildendopo. We're going to be looking to you all for your input as well, so please do ask questions. We've got microphones up here in the front, and of course, please use the Ask and Vote app feature on the Smart Cities app. You can ask a question there and or vote up other people's questions, and I'll be looking at that as well as to the microphones for your input. So with that, we will start with Paulius.
Thank you very much for inviting us to attend this session. I would try to place things in a context a little bit, because often people think about this New Urban Agenda as something isolated. So let me give a bit of the background to it. As Christopher mentioned already, every 20 years we have the Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development at the United Nations. And so we had one in Quito, Ecuador last year. However, this is not a one-off event. When the General Assembly of the United Nations decided to hold this conference, there was a intention to build on many other frameworks that have been developed by the United Nations in history. Few of you would probably remember the summit in Stockholm in '72, but many of you would know Rio, the Sustainable Development Summit, Johannesburg 10 years later in 2002, and the Millennium Development Goals, which were agreed by the member states. And as also mentioned by Christopher, and Rio Plus 20, and there was this process. 20 years ago we had Habitat 2 in Istanbul, and then Istanbul Plus 5 in 2001. So there is a long history of developing the thought, but also in the current day, the Habitat 3 and the New Urban Agenda doesn't exist on its own, because you are all aware that we have 2030 agenda, which is expressed in 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and there are also other frameworks, which most of you know, and this is the Sendai framework on post-disaster. There's a financing for development known as Addis Ababa Action, and also the famous Paris Agreement on climate change. So implementing the new urban agenda doesn't exist only on the basis of 175 paragraphs of the new urban agenda. If we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which also have different targets, and we try to see how much of this relates to the urban development, we could look at the linkages between different targets, and you would see that there are many such linkages. I will not go into detail. But based on this, we should also look at the urban dimension of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The one simple thing is when the 2030 agenda has been adopted by the member states, slowly the understanding came in that up to 70% of action to be taken on the ground will have to be done not by the national governments, but by the subnational entities such as regions and cities. So we should also see the new urban agenda as an implementing mechanism for sustainable development goals more than anything else. I've invented this good, bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly, trying to illustrate the outcome that now we have to deal with. I've done with the good part, saying that, okay, new urban agenda, don't be afraid. It's not an isolated framework. It is not a new layer of bureaucracy, because in many countries the national governments and the cities say, oh no, yet another set of indicators, yet another system of reporting, and we'll have to report and report. Why do we have to do that? No, this is not the case. I've already mentioned that the role of the local governments is paramount. There is also a political side to it, because 20 years ago, when at Habitat 2, the importance of the role of local governments has first started to penetrate the multilateral intergovernmental mechanism, you would see that local governments and cities were seen as a part of the non-governmental civil society. Now the understanding has finally come that a local government is still a government. It's not the same as a voluntary association, because a mayor is still an elected governor and not a voluntarily appointed one. So, right, 70% or more of action will have to be taken by the local authorities. But that is not that simple, because in some of the countries we now see, especially in the Western world, say, oh, okay, the mayors will take care of it. Very good. Let's give it to the mayors. They will do it. Not really. It is the collaboration of all levels of governance that is required to achieve this goal. So we promote at the United Nations national urban policies that sets the frameworks for cooperation of all these levels of governance. And if we want to look a little bit in the history, you would recall when we started speaking about integrated urban development, first it was about the themes. There were silos and infrastructure separately, housing separately, social services separately, public spaces separately. How can we integrate all these themes? Then the issue of multiple sectors came into the picture, which was largely under the heading of participation, saying yes, that there are civil servants, there are politicians, but there is also civil society, there is also private sector. We have to work together on this. Then the next layer of complexity has been introduced in terms of multiple territorial scopes. Yes, I say, yeah, well, there are municipalities, but there are also regions, there are also metropolitan areas, there are city regions, and so we have to deal with all these multiple scopes. And lately, this issue of the multi-level governance has added yet another framework of complexity. So working together does not only mean different sectors, does not only mean different themes. To accomplish and to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, there is quite a huge complexity that will have to be tackled. But the ugly part is not the complexity. The ugly part is that we are often asked about, okay, how will the implementation of the Agenda 2030 and the new urban agenda going to be financed? And the response is, well, that there is no new money in the world. So the policies will have to be readjusted, institutions will have to be realigned, private sector will have to be drawn into more coordinated action, and we will see more and more of what in the language of financial institutions is called blending. If we have seen a lot of technical cooperation for the sake of its own, more and more the financing institutions, the donors, are seeing it as a part of a long process which starts from policy development and must end with actual investment on the ground. So it will be much more difficult within the nearest future to find funding for separate technical cooperation which is not related to actual action on the ground. I think this is good. When we were discussing the session, I was asked, why does new urban agenda matter? And I would very quickly want to run through this because prevailing model of urbanization does not satisfy anyone anymore. And there is this global tendency which brings to uniformity of the city extensions and the new towns being built and even the regeneration plans, and there is urban sprawl. And urban planning has been reduced to nothing. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time showing you the data, but if you look, for example, at the sprawl, you would see that with the rather little growth of population, cities take up and more of valuable resource, such as the land. And it's difficult to believe, but when you look at the last 120 years, the cities are less and less planned. They just happen, partly as informal settlements, but partly also as legally enabled structures that do not build on urban planning. Look at how the access to streets, which are more than 18 meters width, has fallen down over time. And also, when you look at the way streets are laid out in the cities, there are less and less four-ways intersections, which are the most efficient. We know where this comes from. I don't want to blame any particular name, but it's easy to see the source of modernist planning. But do we see a lot of this in the world? I'll show you quickly a couple of pictures so you would see that it is not happening as the Great Vision showed 120 years ago. How are we going to implement the new urban agenda? It is difficult to see how different cities in all the continents are going to do that. We at the United Nations and UN Habitat, we have suggested a simple framework of action based on 5 pillars, drawing on the new urban agenda. I've already mentioned national urban policies as an overarching framework, enabling the multi-level governance to deal with the sustainable urbanization. We need rules and regulations. We need to bring back urban planning and design. We need to consider various ways of financing urbanization and also, of course, be sure that all these frameworks reach the local implementation. What's next in the United Nations? We have the high-level political forum that each year looks at a set of sustainable development goals. This year there was a set of goals looking at eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in the changing world. Next year, we have a set of goals, but also goal number 11 will be prominently featuring in transformation towards the sustainable and resilient societies. And that is where so many countries are doing the voluntary national reviews and reporting on how the implementation is going on. I mean, it's just a list of some European countries, but you could see that these voluntary reviews are quite massive as well. How are we going to monitor the implementation of the agenda? Of course, as I said before, there is a system in the United Nations Statistical Commission on monitoring the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, and that will be the official system. In doing that, we are also working at UN Habitat with many cities around the world on so-called City Prosperity Initiative, which measures different aspects of urban development, and you are welcome to look on the website, and I'm quite sure that many cities where you live are already participating in this initiative. Every 2 years we also organize so-called World Urban Forum, and the 9th session of the World Urban Forum will take place next year in February 7th to 13th in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where typically I'd say about 20,000 people from all over the world come and share their experiences on the implementation. You are all welcome to come also there and listen to these marvelous stories of successes and sometimes failures of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, but also the new urban agenda. I will stop here. If you are interested more in the new urban agenda, please have a look at the website, which is frequently updated, and the new information can also be found there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulius. Now we're going to hear from Mayor Ndipo.
Thank you. I hope the explanation has been so clear on the new urban agenda. Blantyre City, as the smallest city in Malawi, in the southern part of Africa, we had to understand the concept so fast, in such a way that implementation has already been on the ground. Without taking much of your time, I think just a grip of where Blantyre is. That's in Africa, and it's a southern part of Malawi as a country. That is the city, Blantyre, as you can see there. The main issue is how are we implementing this? We have a lot of projects that are linked to the urban agenda to show that we are able to understand what is being said or where we are moving. You talk of the infrastructure projects. We have embarked on projects in accordance to, or rather in regards to the new urban agenda, like construction of roads, street lights, rehabilitation of school projects, the blocks that were dilapidated, or clinics, or rather hospitals, hotels, parquets, bus terminals, and many more. We also embarked on a sewage project whereby the sewage which we had was constructed in 1960s when the population was not as it is now. So we had been using that, or rather it wasn't enough for the growth of the population with the urbanization that is in Malawi growing in the Blantyre, people seeking for greener pastures. We also have embarked on the sanitation projects like construction of toilets, and Previously also, we didn't have the proper addressing system, whereby we could not, when you were in Blantyre, maybe you could hardly trace where your relative is, or rather your friend is. But meanwhile, we've embarked on a project whereby now we've done proper addressing. We also have done the city crocs, and we have done the rehabilitation of the parks. We have reviewed the bylaws, and we have the new land bill. How would we get the funds? In most cases, we have government transfers. Understanding how the municipals work, the government also transfers some cash, some funds to the municipals, so that the new urban agenda should be more effective. As the municipals also generate local funds through licenses, market fees, and many more. And we have donor-funded projects like the RODF, which is funded by the World Bank. In some cases also we have the public-private partnerships, whereby we partner with the private sector and embark on also some projects that will improve the urban. We also thought twice that when we are embarking on projects, whatever we talk of the city, the community has to be taken on board. So by engaging the community, we've seen that whatever we do, whether it is the projects or whatever, it is always safeguarded jealously because they own it. We have also the general sector engagement. Like in the city, most of the corporates take up initiatives. Maybe they might take one of the roundabouts and beautify it. In the process, they advertise on the same, but in that situation, you find that the urban becomes improved time and again. We are also privileged as Blantyre City that we have sister city relationships, like Hanover. We also have some cities in Japan, and Norfolk also in the Nebraska, in USA. As you look there, you see that this is the public toilet. As we thought of Blantyre, that it should be a clean city, a smart city, we also thought that there cannot be a smart city if there's no toilets like this. So these projects are part of the projects that are taking place, and we have constructed about 100 of these toilets in the Blantyre city, whereby if we are enforcing the law that there must not be open defecation, then we are meaning it because there is somewhere people can relieve themselves. But it would be meaningless if we could enforce the law when there is no toilet. These are some of the roads that has been improved from earth roads to asphalt. We've done this through government transfers and some local generated revenue, as already alluded to. We thought it is very important that the community has to be taken on board, as already alluded, that whenever there are projects like this, then you involve the community, the owners, because the motto for Blantyre City is taking back the city back to the people. So this is the way we are taking the city back to them, by making them own whatever we are doing. In such a way, it has been proven to be so super that everybody is happy. Whenever there is a project, whether we are constructing a bridge, you find that there is nothing like vandalism whatsoever, because this is what people had wanted. So the municipals proved to be effective, and the government is happy that the implementation of whatever resources channeled to the local councils are taken care of. We have a problem of parking in Blantyre, whereby for you to get a parking place becomes a bit difficult with a lot of vehicles. Then we've embarked on a project that we are constructing the car parkets. And this is done under PPP arrangement, and it has proved to be more effective in Blantyre and also to other cities like Lilongwe and Zomba. This arrangement, before we had embarked on this, there was a problem that maybe the government transfers could not be enough, because I am privileged to be also the president for the Malawi Government Association, whereby the 35 councils in Malawi have to benefit from the same central government. So by having this PPP arrangement, it has proved to be so effective. We've also embarked on a project whereby we are constructing bus terminals, international, whereby this also is trying to avoid congestion which was in the city, whereby maybe the buses or small buses could not have enough places or rather terminals where you could use as a terminal. Both for in Malawi we have small buses and the bigger buses. There could not be a difference on where the other could pass. By the time this terminal will ease congestion in the city and also improve the outlook of the city. As already said that we embarked on the physical addressing. This also is already on the ground, and meanwhile a greater part of it has been done, whereby one would be able to trace where to send the mail or rather whatever is supposed to be communicated to. We also have the project whereby we're putting city clocks in the city as part of beautification, but also as part of reminding the people about time management as well. This is sanitation. As alluded to, we've benefited a lot from sister-city relationships. Some of these vehicles were donated by Japan government to Malawi and Blantyre in particular. Just because the way we've been handling our operations, they were satisfied and thought of assisting us. And this has enhanced whatever is there, like garbage collection to the dumping site and leaving the city as clean. Some developmental issues like class blocks, whether were dilapidated, some of them were blown off by maybe the whirlwind, have been repaired using the LDF funds, that is from the World Bank. This wind also has assisted a lot, or is assisting. All these are trying to bring together and make Blantyre a livable city. We've also improved the parks. Most of the parks are now up to standard through the PPP arrangement. As the municipal, we could not do it on our own due to limited funds. But when we came to PPP arrangement, we've seen that most of the open spaces are being used and utilized as parks. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in Blantyre City, linkage of urban projects to implementation of new urban agenda goes hand in hand with other international negotiations and agreements such as SDGs. Therefore, the new urban agenda can only succeed if it is linked with other international negotiations and agreements such as SDGs, Financing for Development, FFD, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and COP21, and many more. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mayor. We're going to have plenty of time for questions, so start thinking about questions. We've got microphones, I guess just one microphone on this side over here, and of course use the Smart Cities app, the Ask and Vote feature there, if you'd like to type in a question. But I'm going to get started, and you know, I guess for me, it's where do you start, right? So this big framework linked with all these other global frameworks like the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement. Seems like there's work that has to happen at the national level, and also lots of work to happen at the local level. So I'd like to ask each of you, what would you like to see happen at the national level in your country, in Malawi, and Paulius, kind of generally what needs to happen at the national level, and then what needs to happen at the local level? Can we start with you, Mayor? National action you'd like to see, and you spoke about some of the local actions, but what needs to happen? Where do we start?
Actually, what is to happen is that the national government has to trust the local municipals, the local councils, because all developments has to happen at local. It is the local councils or municipals that stay with the people, with the local masses. So when there is a trust from the local government, the central government to the local government, you find that a lot of sectors are devolved to the local government, whereby now implementation of whatever are to be done with the projects will be easier. And also, I think the transfers have to be adjusted. They have to transfer a lot to the local government, because those are the ones that stay with the local masses, the rural masses, and the local people that are supposed to be given infrastructure. For example, you talk of in urban, most of the urban cities like Blantyre, because the result of urbanization, you have a lot of slum settlements. We need to upgrade those slums. We cannot say that we should remove them from wherever they are. This to bring chaos. We need to upgrade. How do we upgrade? The central government has to come in, have to assist us so that we upgrade those slums. Then we make the good cities. Yes, thank you.
Paul, yes.
Well, I mean, I'm not a mayor, but we do at UN Habitat observe through our field work quite a lot of what is happening on the ground. And you might as well say this could all have happened without the new urban agenda or without Habitat agenda 20 years ago. But we have found that these international frameworks have also acted as educational frameworks to many national governments, because a government in any given country, when it is a part of negotiations in a multilateral framework, they start understanding things differently. So when we speak of government transfers that Mayor Wild mentioned, it is not only the issue of transfer, but it's how much of the taxation revenue is implemented and collected at the city level. We might think that is a problem of other parts of the world, but I was in a meeting here in Barcelona on Monday where someone complained, say, take Spain. Only 20% is implemented by municipalities, but in Denmark there is 60% of whole taxation volume that is implemented and decided upon by municipalities. So different countries, different continents, different systems, but certainly this huge, long quest for making the local governments not only administratively responsible, but also financially enabled, is, we can see, succeeding. Much more needs to be done, but these examples as Blantyre are very encouraging to all of us. Because look here, I mean, they are using the whole spectrum. They're using the government transfers, they're using their own revenue, they're working with the private sector. And I think this is the way to go.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, like in Blantyre, we also launched a service charter, because we wanted to bring the residents to trust what we are doing. So normally we have that service charter whereby the residents are at liberty, they are free to come to the council and find out what is happening at the council. And also we launched this participatory budgeting. Whenever we are doing even budgeting, we call everybody, we call them on board into the hall, ask them, this is what we have proposed for the year, how would you look at it? And in most cases, when the funds are not enough, the corporate world or rather some residents, they come to our rescue and say, no, this is a good project. Let's do like the sewage we are talking now. We are trying to rehabilitate, so almost half of it is being done now. The government could not assist. The council revenue were not enough. But now the residents, since we are taking them on board, they are able to understand what we are doing. So we are moving forward like that. Thank you.
So should I understand what you said to say that you have the responsibility at the local level, but not necessarily the funding streams coming from the national government, and do you have the ability to raise those local funds that Paulius was just talking about?
Yeah, most of the times I would say that most of the operations are done by the local generated revenue, because we only get 5% from the central government, and the 5% is also shared among 35 councils in Malawi. So you see that each and every council gets only a small. So we need to find ways of enhancing our revenue collection. That's what we are doing now. We make sure that as the council now, how do we enhance? How do we collect revenue? So that is the way we are now able to do some operations using our local generated revenue.
And where does that search for local revenues take you?
Sorry?
What are some sources of local revenues that you'll be looking to
We
build?
have markets, for example. We have business licenses that we collect. And we have, we call that street parking. You know what street parking means? Yeah, so we have all those things. Those are some means that to collect revenue. And also, not only that, we train how they can prevent fire. We have that for that fire department that trains companies, and in that regard, we collect a lot of revenue. Just to mention a few. Yes.
Yes. If I could shoot back up to the national level again, Paulius, you mentioned national urban policies, and there's a big discussion going on about national urban policies globally coming out of Habitat 3. Could you just speak a little bit more about what is a national urban policy, and why would a country want to have one?
You have a microphone actually on your
Oh, okay.
I think we can share these. Well, a national urban policy may mean very different things in different countries. We have a specific program together with OECD and the Cities Alliance nowadays. We are trying to promote this and offer different governments opportunities to discuss this. It does not necessarily have to be one single document, but what we have observed and what New Urban Agenda has entrenched as an international understanding, that it is beneficial for sustainable urban development in any country to have a kind of a framework which is guiding the government, but also the relations of the government and the local government and other actors on how they see the urban system in any country developing. It is not only a question of sharing revenues, but as you all understand, many of you better than I do, is that cities in any country do not exist on their own. This is the whole urban system. The cities have roles. We speak a lot about smart specialization. So there has to be a framework. In which way this framework is implemented depends on many different things. Depends on the way the public administration is organized, the way the politics in the country happens. It also takes into account not only the spatial aspects, and that's why we speak about these three very important dimensions, which one is the way the government and a city regulates urban development. It speaks about the spatial aspects, also on the national level. And it speaks about how the financing is arranged in a complementary way. That is why we think it is important to have it on the national level, however it is expressed. I don't know, I mean, we could talk about this forever, but I mean, let's go on.
Well, but it's very important to the debate, because it's how the national government sort of sets the rules of the game, as Dr. Close said earlier. Is there a good example that you could point to? We were talking before. You mentioned Poland as one place that decentralized power, and some years ago, as one example. Maybe that, or another country that you would point to as an example of a country that sort of set the national rules in a way that work for cities.
Okay, well, one thing that you have heard many times talking about decentralization, we have found out that this is not necessarily a good term. For two reasons. Central governments in many countries do not like giving the power away. So when you start speaking about decentralization, well, you are in a sort of tricky field of discussion. But there is a second thing. In many countries which are in transition, which are still developing, it is a question of resources. Some countries only have a number of qualified people and the resources to enable them to do the work, that if you spread all these human resources and financial resources very thin, trying to send, say, an urban planner to every small town, you will not be able to sustain the system. So that is a give and take situation. But the other thing is that sometimes the governments realize, saying that devolving responsibilities is a good thing politically. And we have talked about this before. As a result of all this movement to give role to the cities and urban development globally and to have them at the negotiations table, well, the intergovernmental frameworks are being discussed. Some countries say, oh, very well, I mean, that's the mayor who's going to solve it. But does the mayor have the resources? So, speaking about these big conferences every 20 years, I can give you an example of Poland. 96, you can imagine the Eastern Bloc, just the system collapsed, countries are in transition. We had quite many presidents and prime ministers in Istanbul in 96, but quite prominently there was a president of Poland of that time, Aleksander Kwasniewski, if I'm not mistaken, who made a very inspiring speech about the importance of urban development internationally, but also in transition and changing the system. And he was committed to that. And Poland today is a very good example of a country that understood the importance of decentralization, not only in administrative terms, but also giving the financial powers and instruments to the subnational governments. So I would like to see more of this also in the post-2030 agenda implementation. But we had other countries. I think, well, what I recall personally from Quito, there was a president of Cameroon who is also now trying to change the way of urbanization is happening in his country. So you might say that new urban agenda or sustainable development goals is something at a very high international realm, which doesn't really come close to the ground. But I think that they help also educate or interest some of high-level politicians in the principles that these agenda are forwarding. And once they become genuinely interested, they can change things in their countries. And as some examples show, they do.
I think on the same, let me also comment the Malawi government. Because meanwhile, like the Minister of Transport and Public Works has developed part of it for the road infrastructure. All the councils are doing their own road infrastructure. We are able, as Branda City Council, to upgrade our roads to asphalt with the engineers, with everybody. So what they've done is just to make sure that all the areas there is development in the road infrastructure. So it's not centrally done. And the devolution also in Malawi, I think we are moving faster because, like, the education sector has already fully devolved to the municipals, and the health sector has also fully devolved to municipals, and itself the Minister of Local Government has also developed. So we are seeing that a lot of sectors are moving to the locals, whereby in the near future we find that we'll be able now to reach everywhere in terms of development, and also especially in the urban areas.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to take one of the questions here from the app because 5 people voted it up, so it must be in a lot of people's minds. The question is, could you please elaborate more on the link between technology and the New Urban Agenda? It sounds like 2 different worlds. Is it?
I don't want to sound like a technologically disinterested person, but I think technology is not a philosophy, it is not a goal, it is not an objective. Technology is a tool. Using that tool meaningfully requires deep understanding of the conditions in which this tool is applied. I was moderating a session this morning with a couple of colleagues from China, from Barcelona, from a couple of companies that are sponsoring all this event that work with technology. No one of them ever said that, well, you know, I mean, we are doing this because we have this technology. They speak about sharing, they speak about bringing services to people, they speak about achieving efficiency, but they refer to the principles that are also enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals and in the new urban agenda. In the recent past, I have had personal opportunity to see a couple of companies in Europe dealing not with ICT but with other advanced technologies who have adopted Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. In the beginning, I thought, well, these guys are doing some kind of advertisement for their corporate responsibility. And when we started discussing, they say, no, we don't care. We are not selling in the market for public, we are selling sub-components to other industrial companies. So we don't care what people think about us necessarily. And they say this gives us an understanding of how to manage long-term risk and where the world will be going, because this is agreed on international level, that's where it will be going. It's not only about climate change. More and more people live in cities, and you know the mantra, and in this halls, everyone is speaking about how many people are going to live in the cities and everywhere. So information technology, I think, and communication technology has two important dimensions in this. One is, of course, being at the service and helping to implement and attain all these goals that the society wants and agrees through their governments about going for them. But there is another dimension, which is how things are organized internally in those companies. How they are conducting their business, how they are managing their risks, how they are going for different kind of the goals which are internal to them. And we can hear from Bosch, from ZTE in this morning, that they understand this framework. They don't think, well, I speak about sustainable development as a whole. They don't understand it as artificial. They don't think it's artificial. And it becomes a guiding framework for their business development. I think that is a great achievement, and I also believe that companies that understand how the society and how the international community builds that framework will be inevitably more successful.
Mm-hmm. Mayor, you want to speak to technology, or you certainly in your presentation talked a lot about public-private partnerships and in the parking and other domains. Maybe the question is more about sort of how do you engage with the public or the private sector, and what makes a successful engagement with the private sector from your perspective?
Perhaps we need to believe that as we are looking at the new urban agenda, we also have to make sure that the technology has improved. How do we move fast in this side when this side we are slow? I hope those things have to move together so that we achieve what we are doing. So if technology is down, then we are looking for a new urban agenda, we would not go there. So I believe these two have to move together in such a way that then we should be moved fast. But as I already said, that some of the areas are to be improved. For example, we are regenerating the city, maybe, which is dilapidated. How would we move in that slow pace? We need to move fast. And for us to move fast, then we need technology also has to be the first technology, so that then we combine those two. That's the way I think. To move.
Great. Paulius, we have a question that several people voted up also, just about the World Urban Forum coming in Kuala Lumpur in February. The question is, what are the expectations at that forum? So can you speak a little bit more about what to expect there, both in terms of the new urban agenda and what that means as a milestone, but also more broadly, what happens at the World Urban Forum?
Well, the World Urban Forum as such has one part which is the high level, which is driven by the frameworks that are internationally agreed, such as the new urban agenda. We try to bring together, it's not government driven. But we try to bring people from the governments, from the city governments, from the voluntary associations to discuss, say, okay, now 1.5 years has gone. What is happening on the ground? How do you see it from your perspective? We are still, as United Nations, an intergovernmental mechanism, and we try to bring different other partners in, but that is the basis for this. At the same time, this being 20,000 people, you can imagine, there are a lot of different events that happen at the World Urban Forum. There are side events where people showcase of what they have achieved, bringing, part of the participants into auditorium. There are networking events where someone tries to benefit from the fact that there are so many people who are interested in the same subject, to bring them together in the event and trying to see maybe they can do something together. There are also training events, and this is where also technology companies come into the picture rather often, saying, okay, we have this new product. It has worked in some circumstances. We want to give you an opportunity to understand better on how this thing can work in your situation, but we also want to understand the situation of other people to see how this has to be modified. We still have 10 days to apply for these events, so if you go on the website, which is WUF9.org, World Urban Forum 9 session.org, you will see the detailed descriptions and forms where any institution, organization can apply for all these events. But even if you are not organizing the event, I think it is important, if you are interested in this issue, to participate. Because I assure you there will be something to do. There are global leaders of thought, there are global leaders of governments that come there, and there are lots of colleagues from different fields who come and share their experience. And this is, for me, I would not skip, although I have to be there, but if I would not have to be, I would still go there privately. Yes. This time we are also lucky that it is in Malaysia, because Malaysian government is very committed. They have something to demonstrate, and they have shown a very strong leadership in bringing people from the region especially. Understandably, well, I mean, as the World Urban Forum travels around the world, there is always a little bit of the regional, when I say 20,000 people, I mean, if it is in Southeast Asia, you would expect that 10,000 people would be from Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. Last time was Medellin, Colombia. There was a strong majority of people from Latin America. The next session in 2 years, in 2020, is in Abu Dhabi, so we expect a lot of people from the Middle East. So come, join us. I assure you there will be something to do.
Great, and we've got time for one last question, and this is for the mayor. How does Malawi tackle the challenges like poverty, disease, corruption, etc.? And can the New Urban Agenda be used as a tool to tackle these challenges?
If we talk of, I think I should start with the corruption issue. In Malawi, there is the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And this organization is doing a lot. But if I talk of the Blantyre seat as a council now, what we do normally, that's why there is a political will. When there is the secretariat side and there's the political side, the two work like oversight to each other. So in most cases, in councils, there is nothing like you talk of corruption, because even the procurement process is a long process. You make sure that it's publicized, everything is done in the open manner, and everybody is able to follow it up. And it goes from there, it goes to the government, another department that also scrutinizes whatever is happening, and after which it comes also on the table. This side and this side, the political side and the secretariat side, move together and check that things are moving in that order. Ever since the councils were put in place, there hasn't been something like that. I think we are moving in that direction. In terms of sanitation, as already said, Blantyre in Malawi would say is one of the cleanest cities in Malawi, if not also in some parts of Africa. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is this is so because we work with the community. We don't work in isolation. Like this time around, we launched a clean home competition and clean premises competition, whereby the companies and the homes, they compete for whichever the company does the cleaning of whatever the decoration of their premises. At the end of a year or 6 months, we give out prizes. In that way, we see that we are moving in the right direction. Also, we've enhanced the collection of garbage to the dumping site, and meanwhile, we are also embarking on a project whereby we want to be recycling the waste. In that way, we find that the city is always very clean. And in that clean way, there can't be an outbreak of cholera or whatever. So in that way, Malawi is a healthy country. Yes.
Great, great. Well, that's a great example of how action on the New Urban Agenda, I think, is happening at a very, very hyper-local space like that, where it's literally citizens taking responsibility for their house and their neighborhood, to also at a very high level where national governments need to be rethinking how they set the rules of the road for cities and for urbanization in general. So I'd like to thank you for illuminating the subject. Thank you so much, and please give a round of applause for our panelists.